Aetherdrift spoiler season has finally come to a close, and we've now seen all the cards coming in the new set in February. This also means we can now properly look at who the winners and losers are going to be in this new set. Today I'm going to be chatting over some of the commanders and archetypes I think are getting a pretty big buff in the upcoming Aetherdrift set, as well as some cards that you might want to pick up if you sport any of these commanders. I'm just going to roll straight into it. We've got a few to cover. The first archetype we're going to be talking about is cats and dogs. A pretty popular archetype, particularly over the last few years with the inclusion of Rin and Seri and that secret lair. But there are a handful of new cat and dog cards coming into the game to be mindful of. If you're a cat and dog player, or one or the other, there will be a couple cards here that definitely appeal to you. Cats probably get a bit more out of the deal than dog lovers, but dogs do get a really powerful dog in District Mascot. I do think this card will appear in both dog and cat dog decks as a way to efficiently remove artifacts without having to sacrifice a creature. So one of the things about cat dog decks is they are very creature focused decks, and any time that they can remove an instant or sorcery spell to be able to get a removal effect is a big win for that deck. I think District Mascot goes right into those decks. On the cat side of things, Basri, Tomorrow's Champion, gives us a brand new way to be able to protect cats. He also has effectively a way to create more cat tokens, which is pretty awesome. Glory Hearth Links is a way for cat players to get additional planes or effectively make sure they always hit their land drops. The lifelink is also pretty good, and it's a pretty good body, a 2-mana 2/3. Lifecraft Engine exists as sort of a supporter card that can buff your large army of cats and dogs. Both these decks, particularly cats, are quite good at going wide, so being able to give creatures +1/+1 usually is a very impactful effect for decks that have lots of creatures. Lastly, I wanted to shout out Zahir Glory's Past. This is the first legendary cat in black, as far as I'm aware. There are a few other cards in black that happen to be cats, such as Cauldron Familiar and Black Cat. So if you've always wanted to dabble into that color, you now have an option. You also get access to white, which is probably the most powerful cat color as well. So you could probably build a really interesting sacrifice cat type theme deck. You can sacrifice your 1/1 cats to get some sort of benefit. I think it could be a really interesting hybrid deck. The next archetype we're going to be talking about, which should be unsurprising if you're familiar with the theme of Aetherdrift, is vehicles. These commanders are primarily getting a lot of love through the form of a bunch of mythic vehicles. They also get Chandra Spark Hunter, which is a brand new planeswalker that I do think could be potentially viable in Commander. It's always hard to say with planeswalkers because they are generally quite vulnerable in 4-player formats, but Chandra has the ability to pilot a vehicle without needing to crew it, and I do think that's pretty significant. You may want to pilot some of your big beefy vehicles with this kind of card. Radiant Lotus can sacrifice vehicles as they are artifacts, allowing you to effectively give yourself a massive burst of mana that could be game-winning. Radiant Lotus obviously goes in a lot of strategies, but I do think the card is so powerful that you may just want to consider it for a vehicle deck. Thunderous Velocipede will really suit the vehicle decks that go wide. So if you have a lot of little creatures to crew your vehicles, the Velocipede can make them bigger as they come into the battlefield, potentially giving you an alternative way to win by simply swinging with a lot of little tokens that have been buffed. Salvation Engine is a really interesting card that actually similarly works well with wide boards. This one is artifact creature specific. It has a high crew cost, but it's important to note that because it buffs artifact creatures, your 1/1s become 3/3s, meaning essentially you only need 2 1/1 artifact creatures to crew this thing. And I do think the payoff for it is particularly powerful. Valor's Flagship just represents a really big beefy vehicle. Cards like Greasefang may want to resurrect this and swing with it to get some value. The keywords on it are awesome. You can also cycle it away, so put it into your graveyard to get a benefit. You'll get some pilots, and then Greasefang can bring it back. I think there's a lot to love with that card in that deck. So yeah, vehicles, unsurprisingly, are one of the winners from this set. Next up, we have Outlaws. Possibly one of the ones that goes under the radar. Outlaws also includes pirates and rogues in this case. I think Gonti, Knight Minister, is absolutely one of the strongest rogues that we've seen in a while for a commander deck to be running. I think being able to make treasures as well as effectively give you cards from your opponent's deck for you to play. Slots right into that Olivia Opulent Outlaw Treasure Outlaw themed deck. I think it does both of what that deck wants to do. Admiral Brass Unsinkable represents pirate commanders. There's a few new pirates in this deck, definitely worth running. Fearless Swashbuckler is such a great payoff if you can get a vehicle and a pirate, which pirates intrinsically have a lot of artifact synergy. So I do think it's very possible. Marauding Marco is such a powerful pirate as well. I do think it does encourage you to impulse draw or discard draw, I should say, to buff this thing up. Obviously it has cycling too if you don't need it in the late game, which is awesome. Gas Guzzler is just a cheap, efficient rogue that can start your engines if you choose to venture into that. I think a lot of these decks like to play these difficult-to-block creatures, which means they could very convincingly start your engines going if they chose to go down that path. Far Fortune Endboss, I think, is another interesting mercenary that can go in the Olivia deck. This is a card that effectively can damage all your opponents. Olivia does care about combat damage specifically, but I do think there is a lot of other outlaws, such as Razorkin Needlehead, that deals indirect combat damage, that Far Fortune synergizes really well with. And I do think this is another deck that can start it and get to max speed very efficiently. Next up, we have Discard and Cycling. These kind of both go part and parcel the same. I think there is a lot of cycle synergy in this set, and inherently, cards that care about discarding also benefit a lot from this. Monument to Endurance is a card I've already talked up quite a bit in some of my reviews. I think this card goes incredibly well with Flubs the Fool. You'll be discarding a card every time you cast a card if you have a card in your hand, and you'll be getting this Monument to Endurance benefit a lot. Garvey Nestwarden is the premier cycling commander. You'll be making lots of little dinosaur cats when you as you effectively use these new cards with it. And Riel the Everwise is a discard-focused commander that could absolutely benefit from these. So we have Night Market, which is a new cycling land. This one is pretty basic, but I do think it's worth noting for its cycle ability. There's better cyclers, definitely, but if you're on a budget or looking for something to fill that role, this is an excellent pick. Marauding Marco is back again. You don't need to be a pirate deck to make good use of this card. I think you'll absolutely want this in any discard or cycle card as a 1-drop that can come in as a massive threat. Or, something you can cycle away if you don't need it. Captain Howler is possibly a new discard commander. He also plays a pretty cool role in a cycle-themed deck, courtesy of the fact that cycling does discard cards. And Webstrike Elite is a removal cycler, which I think is awesome. Definitely going to go into builds that care about discarding in green. Not too many of those, but I do think the ability to destroy a permanent or an artifact or enchantment, I think that's relevant, and I think that's something we could see potential in the future. Up next, Goblins. It's been a while since we've seen a massive Goblin package come into Commander. We did get that Goblin from Foundations. That's a really strong one, the 2-drop. But we have received quite an excess of Goblins in red and green in this set. And I think Krenko Mob Boss will be spitting out more Goblins with haste faster than ever, honestly. And I think Draconautics Engineer, it will spearhead that as a 2-drop Goblin that also, for 1 mana, can give all your Goblins haste. I think the two things Goblin decks care about generally are being able to swarm the board with their little 1/1s, and being able to attack with them immediately. And I think for that reason, Draconautics Engineer and House Squad Heavy, which gives other Goblins haste, even ignoring the Start Your Engines benefit, I think this card will be great in a deck like that. Burnout Bastronaut is another card that I think could be a really good top end. I've lots of mana. I got 1 creature in a dream. I'm going to give my double strike creature +1/+1 4 times, right? And swing at you for 10 to finish you off. I think that could definitely matter. Grease Wrench Goblin is another 1-drop that does something later that I think Goblin decks would love. And Afterburner Expert actually pops in as an alternative Goblin in green. So Gruul is sort of the secondary color for Goblins. There are some red-green Goblins. An Afterburner Expert could pop up, given the fact that we've seen a lot of other Goblins with Exhaust. So you may want to make a red-green Goblin deck with Exhaust as a sort of secondary theme, which I do think could be really cool. Up next, we have Oozes. Another unsupported creature type. Oozes come in as effectively being built around Slime Against Humanity at the moment, And I think you get a couple pieces here that support that. Namely, March of the World Ooze. Slime Against Humanity is a 0/0 creature, which means March of the World Ooze would buff it to 6/6, plus any counters that go on it, which I think is pretty substantial, and I do think can potentially win you games. There's Ooze Patrol, which is another sort of role player in that kind of deck. We got a new Mimeoplasm, so you may have a new Slime Ooze Commander, should you be interested. I think if you choose to run Mimeoplasm, what you'll probably do is if you're running Slime Against Humanity, you're probably going to be exiling your opponent's creatures and trying to take advantage of their abilities while relying on Slime Against Humanity to push through damage. Slick Imitator is a cute card that I think could be relevant in our Ooze deck. Though the copy the copy spell thing I think is really cool. You'll need to find a way to be able to start your engines and get to max speed though. Might be difficult in that kind of deck, but definitely worth noting. And the last one is our Dinosaur Ooze Friend, the 5 mana 9/7. A funny card to copy, definitely. It's completely vanilla, so most of the time it will probably get chump blocked. But I do think it could have a role to play in these kind of decks. Definitely one to watch. I think there's the dream where you swing in with the 2/2 colorless creature with Vanifer, and then you flip it to reveal the 9/7 Ooze, and I think you absolutely pummel someone into the dirt. Hey, Jerry from the future here. It would be remiss of me if I didn't mention which commander I think will benefit the most from the new set coming out. If you've had a look at any of the precons, you'll know that there is a very powerful looking zombie precon in white, black, and blue coming. I think it's going to be a really interesting deck, but I think it gives Varina the Lich Queen possibly the most powerful tools I've seen an existing commander get en masse. In the sense that there are so many cards in this set that are going to push Varina into such a new level of power. For those of you who don't know, Varina is a zombie-themed commander that cares about discarding cards and drawing cards, basically. There is a ton of cycling synergy in Aetherdrift, as well as a bunch of new zombie tools that are coming into play that I think will give Varina the edge. I do think that if you do buy the zombie precon, using Varina will probably be the strongest way you can get the most out of it. She is a very strong commander, even before this precon. I do think both of the alternative commanders of the deck are great fits for her as well. I do think that, and there's also a handful of cards in the precon, such as On Wings of Gold and Lost Monarch of Ifnir, that really help the deck as well. And from the main set, I think Monument to Endurance, this card is going to be brilliant in Varina. You're going to be discarding and drawing cards already, and Monument to Endurance will give you a way to deal damage to each opponent with that, as well as make treasures and draw cards. Embalmed Ascendant and Zahir, Glory's Past. Both of these cards might have start your engines, but I do think that what they do outside of that, where Embalmed Ascendant gives you 2 zombies for the price of 3 mana, which I think is great, giving you more triggers for Varina. And Zahir Glory's Past, once you can activate start your engines, which I think you can do with enough support, will let you effectively make zombies for sacrificing your non-token zombies, which again, fantastic effect. All in all, I think Varina is hands down the biggest winner of the set, but keep watching. I'm about to go over a couple more cards and commanders that I think are also getting a pretty big buff too. Lastly, I have a special section here for cards that I would call good stuff cards. These are cards that I feel can fit into a variety of strategies. They aren't just pigeonholed into 1 or 2 decks. And I think these cards can effectively play a significant role in the colors that they are in. From in no particular order, Loot the Pathfinder, while 3 colors, I think is such a powerful card. He will probably be a commander more in his own right, but I do think if you are in the same colors that Loot is in, I think you should definitely consider adding him to your deck if you happen to pull a copy. I think you'll find his flexibility and ability to sort of cover a variety of situations really invaluable. I particularly like the draw 3 cards element, and also being able to do all of this at instant speed, I do think is pretty impactful. Full Throttle is possibly one of the new better win cons that you have in a red creature deck. Being able to swing 3 times with a single creature is, well, being able to swing 3 times with an entire board of creatures is a seriously powerful effect. Bloodthirster is a commander card that pops up every now and again for its ability to continually trigger combats. I think Full Throttle skips the middleman, basically just requires you to have a board of creatures already to be able to achieve that outcome. If you have creatures that get triggers when they attack as well, you can effectively triple dip into that effect, should you be able to preserve the creature each time it attacks. I do think this will be really powerful. Momentum Breaker is a really cool card in the sense that it hits every opponent. Sheoldred's Edict is a really powerful commander removal spell, since you're able to force every player to sacrifice a creature or non-token creature or even Planeswalker. Momentum Breaker can't hit Planeswalkers, however, what it can do is, against opponents who don't have anything to sacrifice, you can actually make them discard a card, which I do think adds a little bit of extra value. It also hits artifacts, meaning turn 1, if your cheeky opponent plays a Soul Ring, you can immediately respond with Momentum Breaker to kill any annoying artifacts your opponents might be trying to ramp with. Riptide Gearhulk is an Azorius Gearhulk, easily the best of the bunch, that also takes advantage of the 4 each text. When it comes into the battlefield, it's a threat on its own, being able to trigger on prowess. I said in a preview video that I felt that the Jeskai Narset that cares about prowess would love this card. I think there's a lot of decks in Commander that would love this card. And it also is very flexible in what it can target. It can target any non-land permanent, and it can send it 3 from the top. You can mill them out, in the sense that if you make them mill cards after you send it away, you might just be able to remove it from the game. You can always counter it as well. I think there's a lot of ways for this to just put a threat away and effectively not have to deal with it for a while, or not at all even. And then lastly, we have a bunch of lands. The Verge cycle returns. This time it's the enemy Verges. They're some of the best lands in Commander, probably behind the Fetches, the Shocks, and the Surveils, in my opinion. The Verges pretty unconditional most of the time, in that they come in for 2 and come in untapped, which is massive. The other ones that are definitely worth mentioning are the Raceways. Armenket Raceway is like Arena of Glory for decks that aren't in red, and honestly, red decks might run both. I think Start Your Engines, obviously you don't need to be in that mechanic to really abuse this. Obviously you have to track your speed, which might be a bit annoying, but I think the payoff of getting haste on any creature, that could be game-winning, honestly. And Miraganda Raceway is effectively an ancient tomb at home. It's definitely better than Temple of the False God, which doesn't tap for any mana until you have 5 lands. You can bring this in on turn 1, and it is a humble tap for 1 colorless. You can play your Soul Ring with that if you really want to. What's probably more likely going to happen is you play a colored mana early, so you can play a creature. Then when you can deal damage, you play the Raceway. I think the payoff of it tapping for 2 colorless mana is definitely not to be ignored. Ancient Tomb is an incredible card. This, while not as strong as it, can do a pretty good impression of it in the right deck, and I think that's definitely something worth watching. That concludes the wrap-up of Aetherdrift spoilers for upcoming Commanders. I will be going over a couple of decks that I'm planning to build in the next video, so keep it for that. I'll also probably be going over my top cards for the set, the chase cards that I think you should look to pick up, and you should be really happy if you happen to get them from a pack. If you enjoy my content, please give me a subscribe and a like. It goes a long way, and I'd love to hear your feedback, honestly. If you think I pronounce Basri really strange, please tell me in the comments. I'm Australian, I make no apologies. But until next time, guys, cheers.